Story 1. Stage 4 cancer at age 30. They had to remove numerous parts of me and I underwent 3 months of chemotherapy. But I have been cancer-free for 13 years and counting. Story 2. I was lost in the woods overnight during a psychotic episode. The police found me the next morning walking down a dirt road in my underwear. An officer put me in the car to take me to the hospital. On the way, I kept trying to remove my underwear, claiming I was burning up. The doctors told me when I woke up days later that I was in the final stage of hypothermia and would have died if I had not been found when I was. Story 3. The love of my life and I were struck by a drunk driver on the way to my proposal to her. She died on impact. One of my trauma nurses believes that I survived only because I remained focused on the love of my life. I only lost consciousness after being removed from the wreckage and placed on a stretcher. I am humbled by the number of people this has touched. I am simply being truthful in my response to the question asked. Story 4. I caught measles before the vaccine was available and became severely ill, with survival being uncertain. I experienced a very high fever, hallucinations, and fever dreams. I was wrapped in wet sheets to try to reduce the fever, but I still remember some of those dreams. Fortunately, I do not have any long-lasting effects. Those who oppose vaccines are misguided. Story 5. I was 8.5 months pregnant and went into labor. I started hemorrhaging due to placental abruption. I almost bled to death and ended up receiving around 15 units of blood products. Unfortunately, my son did not survive. Story 6. When I was about 7, I was in a small John boat with some family in a no-wake zone. A large boat ignored the no-wake zone, causing our John boat to capsize and hit me in the head, knocking me unconscious. I was underwater for a few minutes before my mother found me and pulled me above the surface. Story 7. Had an ex-boyfriend choke me until I passed out. He could have killed me. Then he threatened to kill my nephew if I ever told. He held a steak knife to my throat, then cut my arm. I had a scar for years. In college, I was driving too fast on curvy roads. I hit the shoulder and started to go off the road, which was a steep downward hill full of trees leading to a river. I would have rolled over. I overcorrected and spun into the other lane, clipping the embankment on the opposite side. I kept spinning and regained control right at the edge of my original side of the road. If I had a passenger who opened the door and stepped out, they would have fallen down the hill. I had gone right between two trees when I hit the embankment. I'm not sure how I didn't end up at least seriously injured. I only had a concussion. When I was around 9 years old, my middle brother placed a shotgun to my chest and then my head while laughing about how he could kill me. When I cried, he told me it wasn't even loaded. But that night, my dad lost his mind because someone had messed with his gun. He asked my brother, who blamed me, but my dad told him, "She doesn't know how to load it or where the bullets are." Then he unloaded it. My brother had loaded the gun and aimed it at me. He is 6 years older and was very aware of what he was doing. My dad didn't have guns in the house after that. So, not really near-death experiences, but times I could have easily been killed. Story 8. I got electrocuted for 15 full seconds by an extension cord that had cuts in the insulation exposing the bare wire. It was a hot day and I was sweating, which lowers the resistance of the skin while jump-starting a customer's car. My left hand was over a portion of the extension cord with exposed wire, and my right hand grabbed the metal door handle of the back door. I was immediately locked in place with current running through my body, and every cell was vibrating uncontrollably. The first thing I did, as anyone would, was let go. The problem was that my brain no longer had any control. I tried to tell my hand to let go, but I couldn't release the handle at all. There was no response. Once I realized that, I started to panic and screamed for help. I was at the back of the store, and the radio was blasting at the front, so no one heard me at first. At the 10-second mark, my heart started to palpitate, my vision darkened, and I had flashbacks of my life. I thought I was going to die. At that moment, even though I believed in God, I was terrified of what comes next. The fear was rooted in our uncertainty about what happens after death. That fear of the unknown was overwhelming. My coworker finally made his way to the back and tried to pull my hand away from the door handle but couldn't. He then removed the wire from my other hand, which ended the circuit. I collapsed to the floor, and an ambulance came. I was in shock, so they took me to the hospital. My electrocardiogram didn't show anything abnormal, but follow-up with my doctor indicated some elevated enzyme levels in my muscles. I never sued the company for having us use a worn-out extension cord to jumpstart customers' cars. It was a very overwhelming experience, and I was a young 21-year-old trying to finish college. 2 years later, I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and always wondered if there was any correlation to that event. Always make sure the extension cords you are working with are in good shape. Electricity does not discriminate. Story 9. Childbirth. My daughter was born 7 weeks early. I experienced a near-death situation but was revived. We are both totally fine now. She is 18 years old, and you would never know she was premature. Story 10. I gave birth to a beautiful girl in 2018. 2 hours later, I felt like I had to urinate, but it was a lot. I called my nurse, and she looked at me and said, "Sweetie, I'm going to take the baby," then started calling for a doctor and other nurses. I was confused and asked what was going on. I was hemorrhaging and lost a significant amount of blood. I was on the verge of passing out until they finally managed to stop the bleeding. I ended up having to get a blood transfusion. I was terrified of passing out because I was sure I might not come back after losing so much blood. Story 11. I was making a big pot of soup, and the gas burner wasn't functioning properly. I almost experienced carbon monoxide poisoning an hour later. Story 12. I had pulmonary embolisms. I have polycystic ovary syndrome, and when I was 32, a doctor decided to treat me with birth control pills. 6 weeks in, I started experiencing significant shortness of breath. I had to go to urgent care, where they suspected I was having a panic attack. After half an hour, they decided to send me to the emergency room by ambulance. As I was being wheeled in, the emergency room doctor, who was attending to another patient, saw me and said, "It's pneumonia or pulmonary embolism." I told him, "Not pneumonia." He then said, "Okay, pulmonary embolism." He hadn't even gotten within 15 feet of me, and he knew. It was scary. Story 13. I passed out at a bar, my eyes rolling in the back of my head. An ambulance was called, and my blood alcohol level was 0.346. A level of 0.400 is lethal, which is almost double. I am a 26-year-old woman weighing 120 pounds. I woke up in the hospital the next afternoon. This was my worst relapse ever. Never again. Story 14. I almost drowned in the ocean as a child. I didn't have enough strength to sit up after the waves knocked me on my back. My dad lifted me up and somehow cleared the water from my airway. Story 15. Acute pancreatitis with hepatitis A and fluid seeping into the space between my organs and skin. I didn't go to the hospital for 14 hours. I was as yellow as a character from The Simpsons. Story 16. At age 10, I tried to follow my father and brother into the sea. They were not waving me over to them as I thought, but instead were gesturing for me to turn back. Eventually, the riptide that swept them out there caught me too. Some incredible paternal instincts gripped my dad, and he powered out of that situation with both of us tucked under each arm. I have no clue how he managed it. Never trust the sea, folks. Story 17. I was 17 when I was hit by a car traveling at 45 miles per hour. I was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 120 pounds at the time, so I was small. The impact sent me flying, and my body scraped against the asphalt. I suffered a skull fracture and a subdural hematoma, which is a brain bleed. From half of my shin to my toe was completely burned. It was cleaned up, and now, at 31 years old, you can see part of my leg missing due to this injury. I dislike how it feels. I have nerve damage there, and it feels like snake skin. I had a skin graft done, and the skin was taken from my thigh. I was in the hospital for almost 3 months. Story 18. I hemorrhaged during the birth of my eldest. The doctor, nurses, and students in the room were busy cleaning my child up, so they didn't notice until my husband began to panic due to the large pool of blood forming beneath me. I was unconscious by then. Story 19. I almost drowned in the backyard pool when I was around 3 or 4 years old. I was sitting in one of those floating rings and leaned too far forward, trying to retrieve a toy I had dropped in the water. The ring flipped over and held me upside down underwater. My mom was right there and pulled me out quickly, but I was already unconscious. Our neighbors heard the commotion and one of them started cardiopulmonary resuscitation while my parents called for an ambulance. The hospital checked me over and provided oxygen, and I was discharged later that evening. Story 20. I attempted to end my life almost 7 years ago by hanging. The noose was surprisingly tight, and for the first minute or so, I felt at peace, even though I was actively and violently dying. I suppose I blacked out for a moment. When I regained consciousness, my vision was blurred and everything was zooming in and out, as if my eyes were a camera lens. I also began kicking around like a maniac. That's when my survival instincts kicked in. I was fighting against time and trying hard to loosen the noose. Eventually, I did. I simply untied the laptop cord, put it in a drawer, and went back to sleep. The following morning, I woke up feeling absolutely nothing mentally, but I had a sharp pain in my tongue. It was swollen because I had bitten into it extremely hard at some point during the attempt. I already have attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, and ever since that attempt, I feel like I exacerbated it because my symptoms are so much worse now. On the flip side, though, life is much better than it was all those years ago. I wouldn't say I'm cured of depression because I truly believe that it's a chronic issue, but I've gotten much better at managing it and living as normal a life as I can. Story 21. Doctors revived me. Edit. Wow, someone actually downvoted this? That's concerning. If you must know, it was a suicide attempt. Story 22. I was crossing a pedestrian lane when a large bike traveling at 90 kilometers per hour came within 3 inches of hitting me. Story 23. It was an extremely foolish decision that could have resulted in serious injury or worse at a job site. Although this incident wasn't recent, I have learned my lesson and should have known better. Story 24. I drank too much alcohol, passed out, and had a near-death experience. I woke up with my head in the toilet vomiting. Obviously, it was not my time. Story 25. When I was in 5th grade, I was jaywalking across a road to get to school and stopped right when a car zoomed past me. Story 26. Hit by lightning at age 6. I spent a month in the hospital. I fully recovered but have been terrified of storms and lightning ever since. I won't step outside if I hear a storm, and during lightning storms, I usually stay away from all windows and often hide in my bed. I was hit by lightning indoors while my house was being renovated and had no roof on the 3rd floor. I was standing at the bottom of the stairs on the ground floor. Story 27. On New Year's, I was having fun with friends. I have a personal rule that I want to try every kind of drug just once. That's a strict policy of mine. That night, I had too much alcohol, smoked many cigarettes, used marijuana like it was air, and did cocaine. I overdosed on everything, had a seizure, went into respiratory failure, and put immense stress on my heart. Thankfully, I didn't have a heart attack, but it was highly likely. I felt sharp pain in my chest, couldn't breathe, and genuinely thought I was going to die. I didn't. I still want to try different substances just once, but now I know to start small and slow. Story 28. I stopped breathing in my crib when I was 8 months old. My mom noticed and screamed for my dad. She shook me by the shoulders, and I caught my breath. A case of sudden infant death syndrome almost happened. Story 29. I have had 3 occurrences. 1. At 19 years old, I fell asleep at the wheel of my car. I was going about 30 miles per hour and hit a telephone pole dead center. My head went through the windshield, resulting in a concussion, a broken nose, and 50 stitches in my head and face. The tow truck driver brought the car to my house and said to my mom, "The person driving this car didn't make it, did they?" Remarkably, I was treated and released. I had just gotten off the freeway a minute before. If I had fallen asleep a minute earlier, I would have been going much faster, and the outcome would have been worse. I was at work waiting for a delivery truck with a metal roll-up door open to the stockroom. We were in the midst of a severe thunderstorm, and the ground was wet, as was the stockroom doorway. A bolt of lightning struck the ground about 30 feet away from me. A surge of electricity traveled through the ground and into the metal door track I was holding my hand on. It felt like someone hit my right arm with a sledgehammer, and the whole right side of my body was tingling. My arm hurt for several hours afterward. Luckily, I had no lasting effects from my close call. I was pulling out onto a highway from a convenience store. I habitually stopped to read the newspaper headlines in the rack near the door, which I did this time as well. I then got in my car and began pulling out onto the dark nighttime highway. As I did, a car came seemingly out of nowhere with no headlights on, going at a very high rate of speed. I don't know how he missed me, but I could feel the rush of air move my car as he passed. I never saw him until he was literally passing the front of my car by what must have been mere inches. If I hadn't paused to look at the newspaper headlines, he would have probably T-boned my driver's door. Story 30. At 9, I jumped into a pool unsupervised, thinking that I could automatically swim simply by being in the water. I didn't enter a pool or any other body of water for another 14 years. Story 31. Overdose and paracetamol poisoning. If it had been left a few more hours, it would have been fatal, but it felt like it was killing me by the time the ambulance arrived. If I had given my wife assurance by answering my phone, she would not have made it in time. I think about that a lot. Story 32. At 35, I experienced gallbladder sepsis and then developed pneumonia while in the hospital. I have severe asthma, which worsened my condition. I spent 10 days in the hospital and received 2 weeks of care at home. Story 33. I had advanced pancreatic necrosis. I am a patient person, but, as it turned out, even too patient. I was in critical condition when I arrived at the hospital. I don't remember much about that time. I regretted that I would die without visiting the tundra, something I had never thought about before, and I really wanted to go beyond the Arctic Circle. The cold was my dream. Story 34. Once, while camping alone, I was in my tent and about to go to bed when I experienced intense chest pain. It felt like a hedgehog was pressed against my heart, and I had trouble breathing. I don't know if I fell asleep or blacked out, but by morning, I felt okay. I have no idea what it was, but I'm sure it was the closest I've been to death. Story 35. 1. Nearly drowned at an early age. Nearly got trampled by cattle. Almost fell off a roof while trying to grab onto the power lines. Nearly drowned at a waterfall. Nearly drowned again while trying to save my younger brother from drowning. Almost got mauled by a cow with a calf. Nearly got hit in the neck by a rotten piece of wood. Depression. Story 36. My sister pushed me under a pool cover in an above-ground pool in the 1970s. I was 2 or 3 years old. Apparently, I was not breathing. Story 37. One of my kidneys sort of exploded, and I almost bled out internally before they brought in a surgeon to embolize it. I significantly impacted the blood bank. Story 38. I had my gallbladder removed, and they accidentally nicked my liver. My lungs collapsed, and I developed pneumonia. A priest read me my last rites twice during my 30 days in intensive care. Story 39. A few years ago, I had a pulmonary embolism, and it was rough. It started with sharp stabbing pains in my right chest. It felt like I was being stabbed, and I had trouble breathing. It hurt so badly. I made 3 trips to the emergency room, with the last one being in an ambulance. On the first trip, my wife took me. I was in so much pain, but it would come and go. They examined me, poked and prodded, then sent me home with Tylenol for the pain. The second trip was after a horrendous attack. I was in so much pain I was nearly passing out. My wife panicked and called the ambulance. I blacked out, and just before I did, I thought, so this is how I die. I literally felt like I was just gone. When I came to, the pain had subsided. The ambulance came and they checked me out. I was okay again. It was weird. Back to the emergency room with my wife, and they sent me home again 6 hours later. The next morning, another attack occurred. It was brutal. I called the ambulance again, and this time the paramedics arrived while the episode was happening. I was screaming in pain and writhing on the floor when they came in. My son was there and had to call for help. This time, the emergency room doctor requested tests for a pulmonary embolism, and sure enough, that was it. I spent 5 days in the hospital and a year on blood thinners. I had no injuries or trauma, no medications or illnesses. I was otherwise healthy. It was close. 40% of cases are fatal and quick. Interestingly, I am not at all afraid to die. It was very peaceful fading away like that after experiencing excruciating pain. Then it just stopped. Story 40. At 15 years old, I was at rowing camp. One of the fathers sent me and another boy to fill the fuel drum for the coach boats. On the way back, while driving at high speeds, I crossed a narrow bridge and encountered another car coming in the opposite direction. I didn't hit the other car, but I overcorrected to return to the center of my lane. I ended up dangerously swerving back and forth for a few hundred meters before eventually regaining control. The fuel drum tied to the front of the trailer is what saved me. I likely would have lost control and rolled the utility vehicle and trailer if it had been tied to the other end. It is important to tie heavy loads to the front end of trailers for safety. Story 41. A chunk of ice about the size of a basketball broke off the roof of a 5-story apartment building and missed hitting me directly on the top of the head by about 1 foot behind me. If I had been walking any slower or if I had taken a second longer getting out of the car, I would probably be either dead or severely injured. Story 42. My life froze at that moment. I was in a bad car accident with a fire truck that ran a red light that wasn't functioning. My head went through a lot of glass. I was in shock for a while. Story 43. When I was 4, I was walking down the street when a couple got into an argument and started throwing things from a high floor. One of the objects hit me, and I lost consciousness on the spot. I ended up staying in the hospital for a month. Story 44. When we were kids, a rip current dragged my sister and me underwater for a solid minute. When we resurfaced, we were roughly 100 meters from shore. We couldn't fight the wave, and my mom would have lost 2 kids that day if not for some truly brave men. Story 45. Postpartum hemorrhage after a beautiful and peaceful birth led to the passing of large clots. I ended up losing half of my blood supply and was transferred to 2 different hospitals. I had a small amount of retained placenta. After treatment to remove it and a balloon to control the bleeding, the hemorrhaging slowed. I did not require a blood transfusion, only saline. I felt weak but recovered in a couple of days. Story 46. God made me talk to an old lady after buying groceries. Typically, I am not someone who makes small talk, especially after work. However, those few minutes saved me from an accident. A truck collided with my car because its brakes failed. The driver's seat crashed into a short pole, which would have hit me in the face if I had been in the car. Story 47. My mother was against vaccinations. I contracted whooping cough in the 1990s. I coughed so intensely without medical care for most of that time that I damaged my eyes. My lungs are in poor condition, and my vision has been significantly affected. Then, in my late 20s, the world became increasingly chaotic, and people who oppose vaccinations became more common and extreme. Story 48. One day, I fainted on the couch and was unresponsive. I experienced intermittent symptoms for 2 months, and it was getting worse. An ambulance arrived and informed me that my kidneys were at risk. I was taken to the emergency department, where they discovered I had a ruptured ectopic pregnancy and needed emergency surgery. They said it was fortunate that I came to the hospital because I had lost 20% of my blood. Story 49. When I was 5 or 6, before I learned how to swim, my father took me to a hotel pool. Although I was able to swim with floaties, I took them off during some rest time. I was walking around the pool when another child pushed me in. I remember being underwater, trying to reach the edge of the pool and the ladder. Both edges seemed to be equally far away, and I vividly recall my stress and panic. Fortunately, my father quickly realized I was missing, jumped into the pool and saved me. Story 50. Subacute massive pulmonary embolism a year ago. I work from home, and my workday began at 4 a.m. I went downstairs for my break and was out of breath, which seemed unusual. I thought I shouldn't be short of breath going down the stairs. Then I started having pain in my chest, extending between my shoulder blades. I kept thinking, I am not having a heart attack today. I will have my birthday first. My birthday was a few days away. I managed to get back upstairs and woke my daughter to tell her I was having the longest heart attack ever. We decided she would take me to the emergency room after I finished my shift. While getting dressed to be presentable, I collapsed unconscious in the bathroom for a couple of minutes, scaring my daughter. Since we thought I was having a heart attack, we informed the intake nurse, and I was fast-tracked for initial tests. Later that evening, the doctor on call told me I had a very large pulmonary embolism and that I would be started on anticoagulants. I was so exhausted that I slept on the gurney in the emergency room hallway, totally oblivious to the noise around me. A couple of days later, our family doctor called to ask how I didn't die. She said I had what the doctors call the widowmaker, a massive clot in the main branch of my lungs, along with a couple of clots in each lung for my body to hopefully absorb over time. This year, I had a little tumble at the lookout point on Mount Tide in Tenerife, the third highest volcano in the world. Luckily, I fell on the right side of the tiny railing, only sliding down the rock steps and narrowly missing a fall of about 20 feet to the mountain below if I'd gone over the railing. It just isn't my time yet. Death. Story 51. Necrotizing fasciitis nearly led to an amputation due to sepsis and multi-organ failure. I am unsure how I survived or retained all my limbs. Story 52. I have two experiences to share. The first one happened when I was 15 months old. My mom, a friend of hers, and I were at a lake. My mom's friend was supposed to keep an eye on me while my mom went for a swim. I guess she took her eyes off me for a moment, and I must have tried to follow my mom into the water. I drowned but was fortunately found, and a doctor there performed CPR before I was taken to a hospital by helicopter, where I vomited a considerable amount of water and sand. The second experience occurred while I was driving home from shopping out of town on a lightly snowing day. I mistakenly thought the snowfall wasn't significant enough to require slowing down, so I was going 60 miles per hour. My car drifted past the white line and into the snow on the side of the road. My dad always advised me that if I found myself in that situation, I should slow down and come to a stop instead of trying to steer out of it. I learned that lesson the hard way when I attempted to maneuver out, and my car veered left into a rock wall. Somehow, my back window popped out of its frame, and my seat collapsed, causing me to fly out through the back window and land on the road. Remarkably, I didn't sustain any broken bones or serious injuries, just a few bruises. I don't know how I got so lucky. Story 53. I was in my daycare after school on an April afternoon when the director went to get some soy milk from the store, as alternative milk options were rare at that time. She left her cousin in charge with one instruction: not to give me milk, but instead to give me apple juice. Long story short, the cousin gave me milk and one of the older high school girls the apple drink. My throat swelled up so badly that I almost died on the hospital table. That is how I learned I was allergic to milk. Story 54. Trigger warning. Sensitive domestic violence content. Everyone felt that my mother had too much potential to raise a mixed-race child from a failed marriage. The first time, someone accidentally prepared my bottle next to raw chicken. Occasionally, I was left in the bathtub alone with both faucets running. The sound of running water can be a trigger for me. The most significant incident was when the alcoholic boyfriend introduced me to a tree in the front yard at high speed. It was swept under the rug. When custody was regained, the three of us moved to a small town with no police presence and acted as if nothing had ever happened. These days, I notice cognitive delays, but I have learned to live with them. I am also inexplicably spiritual. I can't shake it, despite having a deep respect for science and truth. Story 55. I am 61 now. Looking back over my life, I realize that roughly every decade I have encountered a near-fatal incident. The first occurred when two German shepherds attacked me early one morning while I was on my paper route. I am thankful to still be here. Story 56. I kicked Grim and said, "Not yet, buddy. That hurt, though. Next time, I'm going to poke him in the eye. I'm too busy to die." Story 57. I was walking to meet my wife after work one afternoon, along the footpath of a busy road with traffic headed toward me. As a semi-truck approached, I heard a noise that made me look up, and I saw something flick up and head toward me quickly. I flinched and turned sideways to avoid getting hit, and I saw something was past my face. A ball-peen hammer struck a tree behind me at head height, knocking a deep gouge out of the tough bark. It was a close call. Story 58. I was sitting in the front passenger seat while my friend drove his dad's lifted Ford F-350 Lariat on a back road covered in gravel and broken asphalt. He started increasing the speed and said, "I'm going to fishtail." Then he jerked the wheel, and my life literally flashed before my eyes. We flipped 10 times and landed in a ravine, with the bed and hood on flat ground while our cabin was positioned in a huge ditch like a Jenga piece. We climbed out quickly, and the witnesses expressed that they feared we might have died during the flips due to the impact of each rotation, which I remember vividly. 2 weeks later, I was hospitalized because my legs went numb. I couldn't urinate and had to get a catheter, spending 2 weeks in bed. They determined it was a spinal injury but couldn't identify the exact nature of it. After being released, I went home to severe spinal headaches. I had to get a spinal tap, which resolved the issue, but it turned out I was very close to my injury developing into multiple sclerosis. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.